Balan Wonderworld released in early 2021 to pretty universally mixed reception. I don't even remember what people's issues with it were. I saw a few videos of it around launch, but kind of purged out all memory of it when I decided that, hey, I kind of want to try it myself one day. I tend to find a lot interesting out of games with mixed reception, and it is a gorgeous looking game in its own right. Those cutscenes and visuals alone got me curious from the start, so even if I didn't like it, it'd probably still be a visual treat. Not to mention some truly astounding character design from what I've seen in marketing. A couple years later, the two coinciding events of a pretty sizable sale on Steam and learning that a couple internet friends happen to be huge fans of it got me to finally pick it up and give it a try myself. And I absolutely loved this game. Not only did I not hate Balan Wonderworld, it might be one of the most creatively interesting and unique platformers I've played this generation. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this game changed how I view platformer design. Balan breaks so many conventions of the genre as it strives to do something entirely its own, and in doing so presents puzzles and conundrums I've never considered before asking me to approach them with an equally unique solution. Or, heck, create your own solutions. It gives you more than enough tools to approach nearly any obstacle in more ways than you'd expect at first. Even some the developers probably didn't intend. It's a game that's begging you to be creative. Think you can break this level wide open, grab those collectibles way up there, even find something way earlier than you should? Give it a try. All spotlights are on you in Balan. If you can go off script, that's bound to be entertaining. For as strange as this sounds, the ability to do so is part of the artistic vision, even. Trust me when I say that if your only exposure to this game has ever been unflattering YouTube reviews or trying the demo under the impression that it'll be a quote-unquote normal collectathon platformer, I hope you'll hear me out today. Welcome to why I absolutely fell in love with Balan Wonderworld. I hope you enjoy. So let me take you on a step-by-step journey of what the average first experience of this game is going to feel like. You start a new game and your first task is to pick from a selection of male and female player avatars. If you're me, you're going to make a Minecraft story mode joke. If you pick the girl, you're going to go, "Aw, that's sad," and if you pick the boy, you're going to go, "Wait, what just happened?" And then you're going to be barraged with this gorgeous cinematic where this eccentric man in a white suit and a top hat takes you into his mysterious stage play-themed Wonderworld. You start the first level, a dreamy barnyard, and here's where things get a little weird. Gameplay-wise. Typically when I start a game like this, I like to spend a minute to test out my movement, experiment with the physics, etc., and that didn't take very long for this game. Analog stick is your move, and X is your jump. Straightforward enough already. Also, this whole review I'm going to be using DualShock terminology since that's the controller I used. You approach some wolves, probably assuming they're enemies, only for them to disappear. Strange. You pick up a key, deposit it into this crystal, and then suddenly you're the wolf. And you get a Crash Bandicoot spin that also doubles as a jump. And you realize that this also replaces your jump. Again, we'll get to this later. From there, it's a pretty typical platformer stage, actually. You find a kangaroo power that gives you Yoshi's flutter kick, you collect stuff, you get introduced to the combat, try a QuickTime event minigame, collect a few golden men, and then you find the end of the level. I was really confused, but ultimately having a great time with this so far. Okay, so I'd like to go into one of the more contentious things about this game right off the bat. Remember when I said that X was your jump? Well, so is square, as is circle, as well as triangle, as well as L2 and R2 for some reason. Basically, most buttons do the same thing in Balan. This was super strange at first because typically platforms will give you some more tools to play around with, like a dash or a combat move, you know. But no, it's just jumping. The only exception are your left analog stick to move, right analog stick to swivel the camera, and remember the costumes? Once you collect more than one, L1 and R1 swaps between them. You can hold on to 3 at once, so there's some interesting management you'll have to do for your abilities right there. Now let's talk costumes. Throughout the game, you'll encounter countless crystals with an icon of a character displayed inside. It's always one of these characters who you see dancing everywhere throughout the levels and disappear when you get too close. We'll talk about them later. I was confused too. When you see a crystal, you will find a key somewhere nearby. More often than not, the key will be right next to the crystal, but sometimes they'll hide it a little. You use the key to break the crystal and grab the costume inside. And these are where the depth of the game lies. There are 80 costumes in total, all with different functions to aid you in mobility, combat, platforming, puzzles, and any old niche utility you can imagine from a game like this. There's about a dozen that are more or less upgraded recolors, but that's still a staggering amount of variety at the end of the day. And the game makes the most of this by constantly introducing new powers and presenting you with ways to use them. There's even some Metroidvania-style design, where the game expects you to notice oddities in your surroundings that you can come back to later once you have a costume that's more appropriately suited for the situation. So, what's the issue here? Because that all sounds cool, right? The biggest point of contention with a lot of folks is when you realize that every costume's function is its only function. When you collect the Tornado Wolf, for example, you get its jumping spin attack, but you're not really gaining that ability. It instead replaces your jump button, which every button just happens to be. So your jump button isn't really a jump button in Balan. It's more of an action button that does something different depending on your current costume. At first, this doesn't seem too hard to wrap your head around, as most of your early costumes just modify your jump anyway, but where people get especially mixed is when you start finding costumes with other ideas in mind. The first you'll likely run into is the Dainty Dragon. It allows you to breathe fire, but you know what button does this? Your trusty action button, meaning you just trade off your jump for this ability. Now, I shouldn't have to explain why a platformer where you sometimes can't jump is weird, and it's kind of a deal breaker for some people. Meanwhile, I actually found this twist to be rather interesting. It's a matter of perspective. If you collect something similar to a costume in a game, your first instinct is probably something along the lines of, oh, this is a power-up. I now have my base abilities plus some added powers in my arsenal. Costumes don't work like this here. These aren't upgrades, they're trade-offs, tools that fundamentally change how you interact with the world. And furthermore, you'd be surprised how much of this game can actually be completed without a jump. You're definitely going to need one for sure, but the game constantly has these little geometry tricks in case you don't. If you do need a jump, the game is always generous to give you one. You just have to look, as the game accommodates for this really unusual design choice when it needs to. I only counted one time in the whole game where a jump was required, and I just couldn't find a costume of one anywhere. But even in that situation, there's an out. Your costumes are also your hit points, and losing all your quote-unquote health reverts you to your basic kid form, which has a jump. Losing all of your health as a solution is not common in the slightest, and it felt satisfying to puzzle that out. By the way, I've heard some people call the game too simple or too boring because of this one-button mechanic, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really see it, and I don't really understand this criticism in the first place. I thought people liked one-button games, or games that kind of boil down what is typically a complex genre's themes or mechanics down to a simple action and then expand from there. You sometimes see it in indie games, like it's kind of an interesting phenomenon and borderline a subgenre in and of itself. I get more this kind of vibe from Balan. The complexity doesn't come from the controls, but from the level design, how the costumes interact with the world, and how creatively they hide some of the game's collectibles. Doing the math, about a quarter of the costumes take away your jumping ability. That's not to say that 25% of the time you won't have a jump, but it's a risk you'll have to keep in mind as you're playing the game. It's balanced, and it made for quite a unique challenge. I love these stages too. The ultimate sign of good level design to me is when a level can stick in your head long after playing. Maybe it had some great set pieces, or a couple collectibles with solutions you'll never forget. There are 24 stages in Balan, and every single one of them does this for me in one way or another. They're big, they're expressive, and they all have something to say about the character they represent. Oh, maybe I should talk a bit about the people and the story in general. The game is about... It's kind of hard to say. I mentioned there's an intro, but it doesn't necessarily explain what's going on in this game. When you get a couple of levels in, though, and finish the farm world, you get a cutscene about this farmer guy who has his entire livelihood upended by a tornado. He is then corrupted, and then you fight the corrupted thing he turns into, and are then traded to a resolution cutscene where the farmer finds a single surviving corn crop and rebuilds from there. Stuff like this is the most story you're going to see until the final boss. You complete a world's 2 levels, or acts as they're called, a creative reference to the game's stage play motif, and also maybe a Sonic reference. More on that later. You then get these cutscenes showcasing the struggle of a person who the level represents, then you beat a boss, and then you see its resolution. World 2 is about a diver who got hospitalized by her dolphin friend and resolves with the dolphin apologizing and then becoming friends again. World 3 is about a girl who can't make friends due to her love for bugs, and resolves with her winning everyone over with a bug that just everyone loves. Rinse and repeat. I got a lot of Psychonauts vibes from this, honestly, another platformer with levels that represent a person's messy headspace you go into and then resolve. God, I want to talk about these cutscenes too. They are nothing short of impressive, and were always something I looked forward to seeing more of. They're all about a minute long and contain no dialogue, and this restriction both allows and forces them to go all out with these. They're big and bold and use heavy pantomime and symbolism to get their story across. I would honestly love to see the storyboards for these. It's also impressive how these can convey some complex and occasionally pretty mature topics sometimes, such as the World 8 lady's struggle of how mourning the loss of her parents pushed her into a depressive state that led to her neglecting her fiancé. That is not a story I expected to see out of something like this. By the way, all of these characters do have names, but you're not going to learn them without going into the theater mode because, again, none of these cutscenes have dialogue. The overarching story is a little esoteric. Like, who is Balan exactly? Why did he choose these two kids to help him help these people? Who is this mysterious evil guy in his army of unversed-looking things? Questions like this sort of led me to speculating these elements a lot, and it was great fun theorizing my own headcanon for everything going on here. I mean, there is a book tie-in to the game if you want to know what's really going on, but for someone like me, I feel that might ruin a lot of the fun for it. So yeah, I didn't buy the book. I did buy the marketable plush though. Oh my god, I got a story for this thing later. Like, I don't know, I get the impression from interviews that the game having barely any dialogue is part of the artistic vision, so it just feels weird that an adaptation in the single medium that's literally all words exists at all, you know? I mean, it does have, like, these beautiful illustrations in the book itself, but, you know, it's a book still, you know? I'm sure it's a fine book, I just choose not to engage because I think it'd be more fun that way. If you're curious, my own interpretation of the story is that Balan himself is some kind of being or god or some kind of entity of luck, and your general adventure revolves around helping these people by bringing them good fortune. I started to think this when I began noticing how many of these people's problems are solved by happenstance or persistence to a point where they were bound to succeed eventually with a little luck, but just needed the motivation to make that final push. Like, the farmer guy just happens to find a single surviving plant. The plane guy finally makes a plane that actually works after failing countless times. You got this trash collector guy who feels invisible because people take him for granted. Though he keeps at it, and one day someone recognizes him and then suddenly everyone in the town wants to help him out. This girl's story is her cat gets hit by a car, and during the resolution, she realizes that by stroke of luck, the cat is just fine. You see a clock in the background reverse here, so maybe it could be a story about time travel too? I don't know. How I chose to interpret that is it's symbolic of when you get over the shock of something traumatic and go back to see if you remembered things correctly. By luck, she didn't remember the event correctly and was reunited with her cat with a weirdly human face. I will admit some of these are more of a stretch than others, but it's something that was in the back of my head for a lot of my initial playthrough. Heck, there's even the design of Balan himself. He's clearly based on showmanship and theatrical productions, but I also get, like, magician vibes from him in this design. It might just be the hat. Magician, top hat, rabbit in a hat, Lucky Rabbit foot, rabbit. About a fifth of the Tims are rabbits, I think. Meet the Tims, these adorable squishy blob things that, in classic Balan fashion, are not explained. Although a few of them will accompany you in every level. They'll collect items and do their best to bonk enemies. At the end of every stage too, they break these giant crystal things that let you collect and deposit these hearts. So they are vital to the story in some kind of way. How I interpret them is the Tims are luck personified. Little bundles of raw luck, if you will. They come in many shapes, colors, patterns, and even sizes that are randomized, because what is luck if not a little randomization gone right? Balan releases them into the city, gives them away, and you're tasked with taking them to the figurative heart of a person, who maybe can't just freely accept them, possibly due to the presence of the Nagati, which are those evil, unversed-looking things that are the game's monsters. Perhaps they and their leader, Lance, represent bad luck, similar to how Balan and his Tims represent good luck. Also, the Tims feed on these colorful crystals to become stronger, and to me at least, they just happen to look like four-leaf clover petals, another luck-related thing. They're scattered throughout every level and are basically your breadcrumb collectibles of this game. They're also apparently Balan's tears? I don't know why he's crying so much, but given he represents luck, then maybe this is some blood of Christ thing going on between him and the Tims, I don't know. In other words, I guess you could say Balan cried for our Tims. There's gotta be holes in this, right? But I don't know, man, the story and themes of this game being simultaneously well presented and barely explained lends itself very well to this sort of theory crafting. I want to talk a bit about the art direction and presentation. This game is gorgeous. Stages are bright and beautiful with tons of set pieces and visual variety. With every world being about an hour long, they never overstay their welcome either. It's a game constantly presenting fresh and new ideas, and I found it hard to put down as a result. I just had to know what the game was going to throw at me next. The character designs are so fun as well, and there's kind of an interesting story behind them actually. It's Naoto Ushima. So, this game was made by Square Enix, but it's notable for having some legacy talent from Sega, particularly him and Yuji Naka. So they've both been pretty involved with the company since the original Sonic the Hedgehog. They've technically done work with the company prior to that, including involvement with the original Phantasy Star, my favorite Master System game and probably my favorite RPG from that console generation. Although Sonic is probably the best jumping off point, as it's Oshima's first credited role as a character designer. Oshima characters have a lot of elements that I both like and are a bit iffy on. They're quite interesting, honestly. They have this mascot costume look to them to me, sporting lots of elements you'd expect from cartoon designs, but with certain elements exaggerated or scaled back just a little farther than usual. For example, the hands. Large hands on cartoon characters is common, but they're enormous on Oshima characters. And this is both an upside and a downside. Large, full, five-fingered hands can make for big, expressive posing and powerful silhouettes. Although, if those fingers are bundled together or overlap anything, they can also get in the way of that silhouette for something very messy. It can also make a kind of a clunky character or model to work with in the first place. If you ever noticed, a lot of the official artwork involving his characters tend to feature the hands fully splayed out for this reason. They look great like this, but there's also the downside that there's only so much you can do with a fully outstretched hand from a posing perspective. I get this from the legs too. Oshima characters either sport these enormous shoes, or do this thing where the entire leg is a single shaft to a point where there's almost no foot at all, just markings to imply the characteristics of a foot, or a shoe, or a boot in some sort of way. These characters exude this oppositional energy, thin or round, good or evil, energetic or analytical. There's not a lot of nuance at face value, but the designs just don't really care. They lean into their exaggerated nature to a degree where you're either going to love them or hate them. Hell, this kind of applies to Naka too. The man just doesn't make normal video games. I swear everything he touches folks are either incredibly mixed on, or is just a little too out there for the average person to truly appreciate. You're either gonna really connect with his games or just not get the love. Honestly, I kinda wish there was more stuff like this in general in games, especially on the AAA end. Everything just feels so homogenized, predictable, and stressful these days. The world needs more passion projects like Balan, games that are very adamant to do their own thing at the risk of not really being for everyone. But you know what? At least they're having fun. Oh yeah, I should mention this real quick, but I am aware of Yuji Naka's criminal history, let's just say. Long story short, he's currently in prison. He didn't, like, kill a guy or anything. Looking at articles, his charges seem to mostly amount to engaging in shady business practices involving shares. I'm not gonna go deep into this. It goes way over my head, and there are better YouTubers for this topic anyway. I just wanted to mention it because I knew someone else will if I don't. He'll definitely get out eventually, and if he decides to re-enter game development after that remains to be seen. Though I will say, if it's anywhere AAA, then that ought to make for one hell of an awkward interview. Another presentation thing I love here is the music. There are 2 credited composers, both with a lot of history at Square Enix. The soundtrack is fantastic, though I'm not great at explaining why I enjoy the music I do, so instead I'll give a few tidbits and express a couple interesting tracks. My favorite track theme is World 5. I love its energy and use of both vocals and woodwind instruments. A lot of music in this game actually has vocals, but they're sung in a fictional language I've heard fans refer to as Balinese. I don't know if that's an official term or not. So it kind of does that thing some foreign language music does for me where I don't understand it, so my brain registers it as almost another instrument. The theme of World 4 and 7 are also personal favorites. The World almost sounds like RPG town music to me, but one of those cool RPGs that encourages you to explore. It sounds adventurous in a way that really speaks to me. As for the chess world, well, I've just always really liked bagpipe music. Although its quieter sections entrust a sense of wonder and mystery. Most boss themes are a more intense remix of their respective world's stage theme as well. That's nothing new, but it's pulled off incredibly well here. There's 2 songs I'd like to give special attention to, though. The first is the stage theme for World 9. This is the Carnival World, and the music is, well, it's clown music, for lack of a better term. Although it's really weird clown music. Clown music is typically associated with being high energy, bombastic, using silly instruments. This theme has the instruments, but when you hear the first few seconds, I don't know how else to describe this than it sounds drunk. And then when the song actually picks up, it's still slow and methodical, with heavy percussion that gives it this almost intense feeling to it. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I really like this song. It's just unlike anything I've ever heard. I do unequivocally love this part with the accordion, though. My favorite song in the game, though, has got to be the battle theme. So, when you're designing a game where you're taken in and out of combat a lot, you're gonna design battle music. Ideally, you'd want to make multiple pieces of music that dynamically fit the themes, tones, and enemies of wherever you're fighting them. That's reasonably outside the budget of most games, though, and it presents a challenge I don't ever really hear people talk about. It's a shame because I kinda love this topic. But how do you make a single battle track that dynamically fits the themes, tones, and enemies of wherever you're fighting, and all while being catchy and punchy without being annoying or too in your face? Because this is a theme you're going to be hearing a lot. I think a good starting point is to give your theme a slow intro, something to ease people into battle. You don't want to explode sound in someone's ears to a point of it practically being a jump scare. If there are more intense sections to your song, you want them to be late into the song, and for a more interesting reason than just the obvious easing into it. The only reason a normal battle would last this long is if the player was having trouble with it, so the theme's intenseness directly scaling of its runtime fits thematically. As for instrumentation, well, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. RPGs can be long, but you gotta land on a combination that feasibly can work anywhere. What is the overlying theme of your game? The overall setting? Are there lots of common instruments between songs and the rest of the OST? Balan Wonderworld's encounter theme encapsulates all of this perfectly. A slow start, a strong intense segment later, and instruments that fit anywhere and pull from everywhere else in the soundtrack. Woodwinds, vocals, violins. It helps that it's a conventionally fantastic song as well. It really connected with me when I started really paying attention to it, to a point of where I would deliberately leave some enemies unkilled sometimes just so I could listen to it more. Seriously, games that use a single battle theme for encounters can be such an interesting topic. Let's start a discussion about this. Are there any games you like that pull this off well as well? I'd love to someday see more musically inclined essayists tackle this subject too. But yeah, the music in Balan is absolutely incredible. Let's talk about some individual stages. Top 5 levels, in my opinion, with tons of tangents, and I mean a lot of tangents. This honestly is more an excuse for me to talk about a bunch of tangents, but I also want to talk about some of my favorite levels, so you know what, let's go ahead and do this. You know that Simpsons meme that's like, if you pay attention, you can see the exact moment he lost all hope or something? This stage was kind of the opposite feeling for me. It was a level that changed my entire mindset from, this is confusing but fun, to, oh, I get what the game is going for here. First off, I like the general structure of the stage. You're scaling a big hollow tree inside a library. Your journey is constantly taking you inside and outside of the structure, with outdoor areas having an emphasis on platforming and indoor areas having an emphasis on combat. The costumes emphasize these two extremes too. For combat, you're given the sickle slasher, which throws bladed boomerangs in a wide arc. They cover a lot of range, but you need to be careful that they don't get caught on any of the scenery. And the circular shape of the indoor room gives some unique opportunities for this. For platforming, you're given the Dusk Butterfly, the game's first parkour costume. Now, that's a term fans of the game have given costumes that generally have very strong movement options. Double jumps, triple jumps, rockets straight up into the air, walking on air effects, and so on. They're considered among the best costumes in the game, and open up so much exploration once they're unlocked. Now, if you've played other platformers before, it might sound weird for me to put this much stock in moves like this, because in most other games you get stuff like a double jump as part of your by default moveset. That's true, so it might seem a little frustrating at first to have to collect individual costumes with these abilities and hold onto them in this manner just to have these moves. But like with the one button thing from earlier, I feel it's a matter of perspective. This approach made me appreciate these moves when I had them so much more. You not only have to find these costumes, adding a bit of, progression to the game, but you also have to play well with them in order to hold onto them. And it drove me into this mindset of, okay, then I better learn how these really work to get the most out of them. As an example, let's talk about the Box Fox. Now, this is not a parkour costume. I'm just using it as an example here. If anything, this costume is a bit of a meme, actually. Every 5 seconds, it's not a complete random like the tooltip will have you think, you turn into a box. From there, you can't move and are at the whims of momentum until you turn back into a fox. I kind of love the audacity of them introducing this costume on this tiny-ass slanted platform over a bottomless pit. You're gonna fall off and lose it like 10 seconds after obtaining it for the first time. But then I started to think on how this works more, and came to some epiphanies. You're actually invincible as a box. So I wondered, if I got a running start before this lightning gate, can I pass through it during the transformation? And it turns out, you can. You can also do this running while transforming trick to run into spiked enemies and kill them. There's only like 5 costumes in the game that can hurt these things, and Box Fox is the earliest you can find that can do so. Aha moments like this are big reasons I love this game actually, because even the most seemingly useless costumes could probably do something you wouldn't expect once you experiment a little. If turning into an immobile box can have this much nuance to it, imagine how much cool stuff you can do with, say, the Dusk Butterfly. Back on topic, this costume lets you straight up fly for a short period of time. You mash the action button, almost like if you were playing as Tails, I guess, if I had to compare it to something. But there's a balancing measure where you can only do this at night. If you try to fly otherwise, you just do this mid-air wiggle and then drop. The stage has a gimmick with these switches, which turns it to night when touched. It's accompanied by this beautiful effect that honestly killed my bitrate, but it looks cool in game, trust me. You know, it's kind of cool they introduced the game's first quote-unquote broken costume in a controlled manner like this. Because later in the game, if you remember this nighttime gimmick, it might cross your mind to try using Dusk Butterfly in a stage that's night all the time, such as, say, World 9. And your reward for keeping that in the back of your head is that it actually works, and now you can get tons of mileage out of this flying ability in the world you didn't even get it from. It's super neat. Okay, so when I said there were 24 levels earlier, that was actually a lie, as when you beat the game, another set of 12 levels open up for a grand total of 36. They're called the Act 3s. Now, these levels are kinda strange. For the most part, they use geometry of existing stages, but are heavily remixed, generally to make them harder and to make the collectibles more challenging to find. I got mixed feelings on these. They're not quite the degree of interesting, refreshing, challenging content as something like Celeste's B-Sides, but at the same time, they're not like just copy-pasted the level and slap a filter on it to a degree of filler that something along the lines of Crash 4's inverted stages were. They're somewhere in between. They're filler, yeah, but they feel more like tasteful filler. I can't help but wonder if there's any weird lore implications to these two. The two biggest differences aesthetically from normal levels that instead of finding golden men, you're now collecting gay men! And in stages where the sky is visible, it's like the rapture out there. How I interpret these are if the entire game is a stage play or indulges in heavy stage play motifs, then these levels are symbolic of when the play is over and you really should have just gone home like hours ago. Like, what are you still doing here? We're putting everything away. The level design is in shambles, the collectibles don't make sense anymore, all of the NPCs or costume crystals have gone home, except maybe a few we decided against using in the story, like, say, the gun. Hell, the main actor isn't even in costume anymore, like, just go home. They feel almost liminal in a way. I know that word is thrown around a lot these days, but it's probably a good descriptor for the vibe these give me. Act 3s feel empty, like a peek into the backstage I shouldn't be allowed to see. Well, anyway, I tend to enjoy these more often than not because I find they're when the game can get really mask off when it comes to completely ridiculous level design in collectible locations. For example, one of the statues for this stage is hidden inside a piece of decoration. This bundle of barrels cannot be interacted with, cannot be broken, cannot be pushed, cannot be entered. For all intents and purposes, they more or less hit a collectible out of bounds, completely out of view of the player. What? Here's the thing though, and why I kinda love this stage. It essentially does that thing Super Freaks did, where it takes mechanics no one likes and makes the coolest levels you've ever seen based around them. Like seriously, how'd you make an elevator stage like the best level in the game? The gimmick of Chapter 5 Act 3 is hiding shit from the player. Yet somehow it works. And it pulls this off in a very interesting way, by conditioning you to use a very specific costume. Meet the X-Ray Ape. Honest to God, one of the best outfits in the game, especially when you're going for 100%. It lets you see invisible platforms, but more importantly, it allows you to see collectibles through walls. It's brilliant because it lets you in on where stuff is without outright giving it away. But this isn't a costume you really use normally. Typically you use it just for cleanup, but early in the stage you see a peculiar gap with collectibles flush with the ground and bits of wood seemingly just hanging in midair. What do you know, there's an invisible platform here, and X-Ray Ape will allow you to see it. And if that's not obvious enough, there's also this collectible a little later that's in plain sight, but surrounded by invisible platforms. Kind of the inverse. How do you get this one? Well, what do you know, X-Ray Ape gives you the answer. There's a little pocket in this corner of this invisible box. At this point, you should be clued that something's up with this stage, and that you should be using this costume just to check everywhere at least. And you'll find yourself discovering all sorts of things, like that aforementioned statue inside of a barrel. Heck, I even discovered something new when grabbing footage for this. Every Act 3 has a secret costume that's typically very well hidden, with a well hidden key to boot. Typically, I circumvent the key part by using another costume that acts as a key itself. But I actually found the key in this session for the very first time. If you stand on this platform, you can see that it is hidden behind a wall. You need to then keep in mind where that key is in relation to that wall as you scale around the level's trees until you can freely jump to it. This is a spatial awareness puzzle that's not even obviously a puzzle at first. Gosh, and keep in mind too that for as much praise as I'm giving this level, all of this cool stuff is being done with recycled level design. This stage is literally just Chapter 5 Act 2 with different object placements, and the fact that they pulled off something this creative is truly impressive to me. It's a great testament to how cool Act 3s can be at their best. I tend to hate open world games these days, a big reason being that as I've gotten older, I've grown more and more respect for games that are respectful of your time. Most open world games are not respectful of your time. Because while it's always an eye-grabbing tagline to say your game is massive, if all that amounts to is just a massive field of empty nothingness, that's a bad experience to me. Massive can be fun, though. If anything, something I've grown even more of an appreciation for are when a game has a few big areas, but are for the most part contained within themselves. Good examples being New Donk City, Kronos Island, San Francisco. A stage being impressive for its sheer scale can work. The exploration, the potential for non-linearity, but I guess I just like things to be contained too to a certain degree. A dense open world, in other words. I can't say Balan really has any areas like this, but one that really connected with me for pretty much very similar reasons was the first stage of the chess world. I gave a big dumb whoa when I first loaded up this level. This opening shot of this entrance adorned with chess motifs, the bagpipe music, and this weird fold effect hit me pretty darn hard. I kind of want to talk about this fold effect, actually. Basically, the entire level curves inwards towards you, but unfolds as you walk around. This isn't the only level to use this effect, but it's the one where it's the most noticeable. I've never seen anything quite like this before, and deep down I can't help but wonder if it's just implemented here to help with, like, draw distance or something, but I don't know, it's unique and felt memorable to me. It gives me this impression of a red carpet being folded out as you walk around, like the whole world revolves around you, which fits the stage play motif. I've heard some folks say this effect is a little confusing and even a little disorienting, but I don't know, I never really had that issue. Trust your jump a little, you get used to judging actual distance pretty quickly, and even if you do fall, it doesn't take that long to return to where you failed. They also give you a costume in this stage that lets you glide, which definitely helps a lot. The actual layout of this level is a huge flat surface dotted with small platforming challenges, battle arenas, and collectibles, with a giant structure serving as a centerpiece to the level. You can clearly see the structure basically wherever you are in the level too due to the curvature gimmick, so you never really get lost in this level either despite its size. What also helped me enjoy 7-1 is that this was also the level where I really got into the habit of using the game's first-person mode everywhere. A third-person game where you can swap to a first-person perspective is nothing new, but for whatever reason, I find myself using it all the time in Balan. If not to get a better viewpoint for secrets, to just admire the detail put into these impressive worlds. You activate it by pulling down on the camera analog stick. When the camera starts rubbing against the ground, it'll pull into your character, and then the same stick will move your perspective around like in a first-person game. You then revert back to normal by simply moving. I got kinda mixed feelings on how this is executed. Deep down I wish this camera swap was on a separate button, but also, to be honest, I think I might have also gotten annoyed by how often I need to press said button if it was that way. As opposed to just doing a weird little trick with something that my thumb is typically touching at all times anyway. The stage gives you 3 costumes to play around with, all of which I like quite a bit. The lower areas are big and flat, so they give you a costume that swaps between running and walking in a similar fashion to the Box Fox's transformation. Truthfully, this isn't a very wieldy costume, but there's just something very fun about using it to me. I got needlessly risky with it sometimes, like, I don't know, it's just good fun. Like, dare I say, it make for great challenge runs. You also get the Floaty Flower, which isn't the best mobility costume even by this point, but most of the world is designed pretty faithfully with it in mind. And then the Quad Cannon, which is not the first Nightmare Fuel costume, and also somehow not the last. This costume is so much fun, though. Basically, the second you stand still, you fire 4 cannons in, like, all 4 cardinal directions around you. Lining up my shots felt like trying to line up one of my super moves in a Kingdom Hearts game or something. I'm kind of a sucker for positional-based combat like this. Like, this costume is, like, surprisingly fun to play around with. The chess pieces look hilarious doing the mocap dance every NPC does. They have the chess guy's face, too, which is kind of amazing. You know, let's talk about these NPCs. So throughout the entire game, you're gonna find these dancing characters which the costumes are based on. I feel like these guys are mostly added to put a splash of life into these stages, and for the most part, it works. And I know it works because the only stages where there aren't any NPCs, the Act 3s, they feel absolutely desolate and lonely. So these guys are a fun addition. For the most part, they're all doing the same mo-capped dance, and I'm gonna be honest, it looks a little creepy at first, but I did get used to it. It would be cool if they all had separate animations, though that would probably be way outside the budget of a game like this. A strange thing is that as you get close to these NPCs, they vanish. And to be honest, for as much theorying as I did, I couldn't come up with more of a reason for this. Aside from maybe being a representation of how stage productions aren't meant to be viewed up close, or maybe they just didn't want you seeing the seams in these models, I don't know. The book, in spite of my gripes earlier, gives an explanation I actually like enough that it's kind of become my personal headcanon too. There are illusions meant to guide the player. Like, that makes sense, right? Like, they act as breadcrumbs to the heart of a person. There's interesting implications that the costumes and NPCs have very personal ties to the respective characters that their levels represent. Like, take the World 12 guy, that trash collector that feels invisible. 2 costumes from his world are associated with cleaning equipment. There's one based on fixing broken things, there's a sun one. I guess that makes sense, he seems to mostly work during the day. And for a very literal one, there's a costume titled The Invisible Man. I'm not going to say where you find this out, but there's a point where you learn that every character also has a specific costume in this world that they just have a little bit of a closer association with, to a point at which they even resemble them, like physically to a certain extent. One of my favorite details in the entirety of Balan is this promotional art right here. Those characters featured on the right might seem a little random, but those 12 specific costumes are the very ones with the strongest resemblance to the 12 characters. That is so neat. This resemblance even extends to the bosses as well. Remember that the people kind of turn into these things, so it's a really cool touch that their designs are an amalgamation of all of the world's costumes. None of them feel too over-designed either, which is kind of a surprise given how much inspiration there is in them. Like, they're all memorable in their own special way. The boss fights themselves are well designed too. See, I told you there'd be a lot of tangents in these. To be honest, I'm kind of shocked more platformers don't handle their bosses the way Balan does. When I think of a platformer boss, what comes to mind is a pattern. The boss does an action or a series of actions and then leaves themselves open to an opportunity for a counterattack. And then that repeats a couple times, getting slightly harder as you go along. At a glance, Balan bosses work this way too, but there are some minor differences that make them so much more interesting. Firstly, instead of waiting for a cycle to be over, you can often counter bosses during the many attacks they happen to do. You can't just sit in a blind spot or walk in circles as the boss is throwing its tantrum. This alone instantly makes them much more fast-paced, as you have to actively engage with them and get into some kind of risk. And secondly, instead of waiting for a single opportunity that you can hit the boss, bosses in this game have 3 opportunities that you can hit them. 3 unique ways to damage these guys, one for each hit point, and they always require different costumes too, which gives you an incentive to experiment in these areas as well. And you're actually rewarded for doing so, as after the fight, you're awarded 1 golden man for each unique way you damaged them. You know, it's kind of rich I talk about the bosses here, as World 7 probably has my least favorite boss, but whatever. They're all great, and I wish an approach more akin to this game was more of the standard for platformers in general. Oh hey, another Act 3. This level changed my goddamn life. At the start of this video, I mentioned in passing how this game changed how I view platformer design. Are you ready to find out why? Chapter 11, Act 13 starts with you in a cave. You prepare your costumes, and as you emerge, you're presented with absolute madness. 11-3, or as a friend called it, Getting Over It with Yuji Naka, is not a very long level. In fact, it might be the shortest in the game, but it is packed dense with moments that just make you go, huh? In the opening area, you have 3 obstacles going in opposite directions, requiring costumes from 1-3, 5-2, and 8-3. That is so random. Also, yes, obstacles expecting you to have Act 3 costumes. You might be at a loss of how to simply progress here if you don't have these, which really never happens at any point in the game. This level has weird enemy placement, corridors you might not even see at first. Everything is either way too in the open or weirdly claustrophobic for a stage that feels more like it was thrown together than actively designed. Yet, it's just fun. It's so surreal, and I've never had a more fun time at a stage that just feels like it has no direction. Why are there so many enemies here? What's the point of this platform? Why are there crystals here? Why is that statue just there? And what the hell is that? So, have you ever heard the term Skyrim horse? I mean that as a verb in this context, by the way. I'm not sure how colloquially a term this is, but I have seen it used occasionally in the wild.
Then we go up this wall by the Teddy Ursas and spam jump to Skyrim horse our way up to the top of this cliff.
Basically, it's shorthand for this phenomenon where the collision in your game is a little too good, and it allows you to essentially jump up surfaces way steeper than you should be able to, by rubbing against a surface and fishing for anchor points, basically. Skyrim is a very jank and unfinished game, yet everyone loves it anyway, for you see, it's just different when it's something that's not Sonic adjacent. Okay, I promise that's the most confrontational thing I'm gonna say in this video. Regardless, that's Skyrim horsing. Why am I bringing this up? At the start of this level, there's this building that looks pretty inconspicuous, yet difficult to get up, but not impossible. I wasn't really expecting anything to be up here, maybe at most a little nod from the developers in the form of maybe a few drops or crystals or something. Mario Odyssey did that sort of thing all the time. It just sort of looked fun to climb, in other words, so I put on some decent mobility costumes and started figuring out how to Skyrim horse up this thing. It took a few minutes, but I managed to pull it off, and What was waiting for me at the top gave me a chill. A gay man. Okay, don't take that out of context. This isn't a secret or an Easter egg. It's just one of your normal collectibles, hanging out in a place I almost wrote off as not worth exploring because why would you hide something here? I then swallowed the camera and noticed another statue there of all places. What? It was at this point I also noticed this giant wall of stuff. This ring-steady ridiculousness at a glance looks like some background element made of a bunch of mashed-together decoration assets. Some of it is even clipping into itself in very weird ways. But in reality, this is how you're meant to get that statue over there. You are supposed to use random rocks that jet in this wall, and then platform across this surreal set piece. And then even on top of that, you still need to get a little more creative for the final stretch to get that statue. Look, they even put breadcrumb collectibles out here, hinting you onto where you can actually stand. I'm reminded of that part during the postgame of Celeste where they give you a tutorial on how to use one of the game's advanced movement techs. Basically, the kind of thing that's a cool quirk, but mostly only used by speedrunners and difficulty masochists. But then they actively make level design requiring you to use it. And I don't know, man, that may sound normal to some of you, but to me, it'd be the equivalent to Mario 64 giving you one of those signs that explains the backwards long jump, and then basing a level around it. Skyrim horsing is not a normal video game mechanic. It's never intended. It's always a quirk of the engine that, if anything, is seen as a bug or an oversight. But then we have Balan going, nah, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It suddenly makes a lot more sense why nearly every surface in the game has collision, even when it might not make sense to. These two statues are a confession. An invitation that something you'd call a normal game unpolished for is actively a part of the artistic vision. This opened Pandora's box for me. It completely changed how I played this game. Heck, I think it's going to change how I play platformers in general from this day forward. Balan trains you to look at geometry that in any other game would either have no collision or an invisible wall around it, and see that as a challenge. How can I get up there? You'd be shocked what the game will let you get away with, and how often you're given a little nod from the developers for doing so. Like, okay, you got this statue in 11.1. That's way up there. It looks impossible to get at a glance, to a point in which I felt maybe there's some secret passage up there I just missed. You wanna know how I think you're designed to get this one, though? Jump on this tiny lip of this pipe sticking out from the ceiling. Jump around this metal sheet to get to the other side of the pipe sticking from the ceiling. From here, use a high jumper to leap to this divot in the wall, and then use a hover ability to airwalk over to the statue. I genuinely believe I cheated in some kind of way to get this, but no, I think this is the actual intended solution. Or how about this statue in 6.2? Do you remember that robot from Sonic 06? He had this ability that lets you hover by holding the jump button. However, you can kind of break a lot of his sections with this ability, as if you mash the button instead of holding it, you can stagger out the cumulative distance you can reach with this ability. Balan lets you do this as well, although unlike in 06 where this is clearly an oversight, they straight up expect you to discover this on your own for this game, because I cannot fathom how else you're supposed to get this statue. Just enough juice.
Why is that the case? Oh my god. It's not even a special collectible either. It's just the normal man. What?
I love you, Balan! By the way, this castle too I wrote off as a background element when I first saw it. I did notice these mirrors down here that warp you back once you get down there, but I think I just assumed they were like dev cubes or something. This game will have you questioning what even counts as out of bounds anymore. Heck, maybe that's why Boundary Break never made a video about this game, because the player is encouraged to do it themselves. And yeah, that's 11.3. The sheer audacity of this chaotic mess of a stage changed how I played an entire genre. How often can you say that? And now for my favorite stage in the game. Chapter 10, Act 2. How I describe this stage is it isn't necessarily my favorite at any one thing, but it's a perfect mixture of everything I think this game does well. And heck, even tons of elements I've already talked about. I love the theming, I love the music, it says a lot about the person it represents. It's massive, but respectfully so, and encourages you to break it. It's also another level where they take a gimmick no one likes and makes it fun and interesting. In this case, this is a maze level. No one likes those, right? They're confusing, they take too long, and half the time you gotta resort to a guide by the end. That doesn't happen here, and I think a big reason is despite how twisty this level is, there's a clear goal that you're going to be aiming for, regardless of if you know it or not. That goal is just to go up. The stage's entire progression is based around this, and unlike in a normal maze level where it feels like there's only one possible correct way and you just have to guess until you find it, it feels like there's a dozen ways to get to your end goal here, and you can even swap between them as you ascend, almost like a maze without walls. The wonderful thing about all of this too is the path you take is ultimately dependent on how creative you can get with your costumes that you've accumulated up to this point. This is a pretty late game level, and I like to think that placement was deliberate, specifically for this reason. The level is a presentation beauty too. World 10 has another personal favorite music track of mine. It's slow and analytical, but with sudden bursts of high energy that prevent it from becoming boring. It could also be symbolic of the artistic bursts of inspiration that this character gets sometimes, though I could be way too overthinking that there. This whole messy art room aesthetic is gorgeous too. The person you're helping in this chapter is an artist whose art is getting less and less attention and trying to recapture some spark of inspiration and create something that people will really enjoy again. Definitely another example of my luck theory at work, because, you know, it can sometimes be up to downright luck what makes it big in the art world. Her cutscene shows her getting desperate about this, and that desperation is captured perfectly in the spilled paint, the mismatched brushes, and floating random art supplies scattered everywhere throughout this level. The design of the artist herself isn't my favorite of the characters in this game. In fact, she kind of freaks me out a bit. I think it might be the big mouth. She kind of looks like a human Pac-Man to me. But a detail I absolutely love about her design is her Mondrian pattern dress. That's like a really cool real-life art thing to reference. The stage also has a gravity gimmick, and like with the maze structure, it's not as difficult to wrap your head around as that might sound at first. Fun fact about how this works internally, but each instance of the flipped room is its own physical location. That can't be too efficient, but it's probably way easier to program, so I honestly can't blame them. It looks like it makes the level kind of fun to speedrun too. I really like the detail that every statue is flipped to the orientation I believe you're supposed to collect it at. There's something really funny to me about collecting a statue on its side. It gives me this happy feeling as I probably got it in a way that wasn't intended. My only issue with 10-2 is I don't like the costumes they introduce here. I mean, they're cool, but you can kind of tell the level wasn't designed with them in mind, which is really rare for this game. Double Trouble lets you detach yourself from your body as a ghost for a short period of time. I find this one is the most useful when you need to take a big Hail Mary jump, like when they place a collectible over a bottomless pit. Yes, the game does do that sometimes. It doesn't really work here because this level is entirely boxed in, though. And the Sneaky Lizard lets you target a big drop and then teleport to its location. I love this ability conceptually. It feels almost like a Zelda item. You could probably make an entire puzzle game out of this. But, and I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't for the life of me find any especially good areas to use it, let alone in this level. I wish its effective range was just a little bit farther too. But other than that though, this was the biggest highlight of the game to me. Okay, so now for the part of my essays that are always fun. The miscellaneous stuff. As I was working on this video and talking with friends about it, I started hearing another pretty common reason why a lot of people don't like this game. Honestly, I should put this exact point for how common it is seems to be more to the start of the video, but I'm lazy. The issue is that a lot of people find this game slow. For starters, your run speed just feels below average for a platformer, and I hear it used to be even worse back when the game was just a demo. Given that you only have a single action button, that means that there's no bonus abilities to help traverse levels more briskly. I mean, there are costumes that speed you up, but I don't think that's really a solution here. Heck, even some UI and core gameplay stuff you do all the time is slow. When you want to change your costume loadout, you have to stand on a checkpoint for a couple seconds and wait for your wardrobe to manifest, and then physically walk into it and you're brought to this very long menu. This screen is great for browsing your costumes, but unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it can take a hot minute to find what you need and get out. Even changing between costumes once you have them is kinda slow, as you perform this spinning animation every time you do so. At least you're invincible during the duration and the end lag of the animation, so at least you won't be blindsided by damage, but the time this animation takes still adds up. I kind of agree with all of this, honestly. Like, there's so many little actions you do all the time that I just wish were a couple seconds shorter, you know? Although, like with the one button thing, I did get more used to it once I changed my mindset a little bit. Basically, in my head, I started to see this game more as a puzzle platformer, as opposed to a traditional 3D platformer. The game wants you to stop and think so much, both to solve challenges and to admire the surroundings, that it just makes sense to not really judge it through the lens of a genre more synonymous with its movement. I feel a lot of this might have been the marketing's fault too. Given how the game was advertised and how the director is known for working on a notoriously fast-paced series, I honestly can't blame people for being a little off-put by something more slow. This game does its own thing and generally doesn't want you to play it like a normal platformer, so I implore that if you ever do try this game yourself, either for the first time or maybe a replay after an initial first bad impression, try and take your time with it, see if that helps at all. Telling people to adopt this mindset isn't going to magically solve everyone's issues, but it might help you appreciate the game a little more. Another criticism I've heard is that costumes are quote-unquote finite. And I'm gonna be honest, this just isn't true. I could be misinterpreting people's words here, but it's not like there's only X number of any certain costume you can grab. Nothing is permanently missable in Balan. The costume crystals always respawn, and their respective keys respawn as well. There are some niche instances where costume crystals will not respawn, like say for example if you have two of the same costume in your current loadout, a third one won't spawn. Maybe stuff like that cause some confusion, but it'll start reappearing again the second you lose one of those duplicates or put it away in your wardrobe. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you want to grind costumes, the best thing I can suggest is to always position the costume you're collecting on the rightmost slot of your loadout. So when you collect another copy, it'll be pushed out and into your wardrobe. The game doesn't really explain that this is how this works, but that's how it works. Why does this matter at all? Well, given that your costumes are also your hit points, if you get hit with a costume you need for progression or a particular collectible, you do need to backtrack a bit in order to get it again, whether that be back to your checkpoint or to a previous level. This does make me value my costumes more and encourage me to play better, although, let me tell you, nothing sucks quite as much as having to backtrack to a previous stage because you made a careless mistake. This really sucks, I know. It's a weird part of the game I don't really like. It really doesn't take nearly as long as I'm making it sound, but I do wish this was handled a bit better. Maybe there could have been a way to unlock infinite copies of a costume after you beat its chapter, perhaps. So in a worst case scenario, you'd only have to return to a checkpoint. Or maybe this could have been a reward for the Balan Bouts, perhaps. You know, if they had to be in the game. Okay, so you ready for the actual worst part of Balan Wonderworld? It's something even fans of the game hate, and they're called the Balan Bouts. More like the Balan Pouts, am I right? On top of the golden men you can find in stages, you can also find these golden hats. That is not as fun to say. These act like the normal men collectibles, they add to the same counter and everything, but the difference is you have to do a really unfun thing after grabbing them to actually have them count towards your collectible total. Yes, just finding these isn't enough, even though the game sometimes hides them just as cleverly as your normal collectibles. When you grab one, you're taken to a minigame where you actually get to play as Balan, which has some nice novelty to it. You play as him as he does stuff. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what the actual goal of these sections are. Sometimes he's feuding against the villains, sometimes he's just beating up random stuff. He does a bunch of actions during these sections, and you perform these actions by doing quick time events. An aberration of Balan will fade into frame and you need to hit the action button when it lines up with him. And you're graded on how exact you got with his actual silhouette. The real kicker is that in order to actually gain the collectible, you have to get a perfect rank on every QTE in these sections. Given these aren't super picky QTEs, although it's more the sheer number of them. They're bound to wear on you to a point at which you are almost certain to get an almost perfect on at least one. Even worse, if you fail one of these, the only way to get the hat to respawn and to try it again is to either soft reset the game or defeat the boss for some reason. I don't know. I really wish just any aspect of these were more lenient. If you didn't have to perfect every QTE, maybe I wouldn't mind not being able to easily replay them. If you could replay them right after a failure, maybe I wouldn't mind how demanding they can be. Ideally, both would be great, but you know. And it sucks too that the game features more and more of these as you go along. The first handful of worlds have only one Balan Bout each, which honestly is kind of a perfect amount for something like this, but by the end of the game, there are 3 featured in every level. Talk about overkill. Honestly, I just completely avoid them after a while, and I can't blame any of you guys for doing this too. Notably, I did actually 100% the statues, with the exception of the Balan Bouts. Like, they're just not fun to me. There's only a couple praises I can give these. Firstly, they're probably the best way in the game to grind for those crystal drops. Completing one gives you a multiplier on the ones you've already collected in the level, even if you don't perfect these things. So just grab every drop you can in a late game level and then blow through every Balan Bout in the stage. Easy way to grind for drops if you're going for that secret costume or that one achievement for collecting over 1,000 in a single level. Also, every QTE has a separate animation for if you completely fail it. And some of these are legitimately pretty funny.
Oops.
If you failed the first QTE and aren't going to get the statue anyway, why not watch him eat shit on purpose for a good laugh? You know, it kind of blows me away how good the animations are here for how poorly this part of the game is designed. Dare I say it's probably the best character animation you're going to see in the game outside of the pre-rendered cutscenes. And I can't help but wonder if maybe these were designed for something else at first as a result of that. Like, maybe they were created for promotional reasons, or they had a completely different gameplay mechanic in mind, had to scrap them, but then were like, God, we spent so much time on these, we might as well use them for something. It'd be a waste not to use them, you know? But yeah, I'd say give these a shot until you get bored with them, and then just avoid them for the rest of the game. That's my suggestion. You know what topic I would love to see essayists explore a little bit more? I'm kind of making up my own term here again, but I'm gonna coin the phrase intermission mechanic. Basically a minigame or side mode you're encouraged to play between the levels of a stage-based game. They're designed as a little wind down to the action you just did, and in some cases you can even get goodies out of them that you can use during the next stage. Balan has a mechanic like this in the form of the Isle of Tims. Yeah, these things have their own island, a floating island at that, and it's treated as a central hub you return to between stages. I love the visual aesthetic of this place. It's serene, peaceful, the music is just beautiful. Along the circumference of the island are these giant dioramas that represent every world. And these are so fun to study. There's so much detail in every one of them, to a point at which they come off as a little chaotic. It emphasizes the feel of the island being your safe space, with these art pieces acting as peeks into where the action and danger lies. The island is also where you use the crystal drops you've been collecting to feed your Tims. There's a little bit of a pseudo-pet simulator here. I've heard people compare this part of the game to the Chow Garden from the Sonic Adventure duology. I like the adventure games, the first one being my preferred one of the two, but this is a mechanic I admittedly never really gave the time of day. One of these days I really ought to get a bit more in depth with it though. It seems to share a lot of mechanics with Duck Life and Wobble Dogs, which I absolutely love, so maybe I could get a lot more out of the Chow Garden? Anyway, the Isle of Tims is a fun little distraction you can choose to engage with between levels. I personally liked it. You don't really get much out of engaging with it, but I still got a lot of enjoyment out of watching them flock around, booting them all over the place, and watching them tumble around in this big tower that reminded me of a marble toy I had as a kid. Look, they even give you a way to view the tower from different angles. It's so cute. Depending on the drops you give Tims, it can give them these little badges that are supposed to give them better stats, I think. implying they'll perform better when they're taken into levels. I think every color represents a different action they can do for you, but I've literally never noticed a difference between Tims with badges versus Tims without them. If there is a difference, it honestly feels negligible. That is a hard word to say. You can also breed them in one of the stranger breeding methods I've seen for a fictional creature. There's one specific breeding you can do. This counter here is always going up as well, and as it increments, it makes their big tumbler tower bigger. I think you only get an achievement for maxing this out, but honestly, I thought it was just fun to see it progress as I naturally played through the game. All this Tim stuff is also how you get the secret costume of the game, and I have very mixed feelings on this. First off, it involves a sequence that is really complicated, and you will not figure out the full order of events on your own, I can guarantee you. It even requires you to get outright lucky at one point, to a point at which you probably should be software setting for one of the steps. Yeah, it's complicated and requires RNG. And secondly, your actual reward is a secret costume that's tantamount to a moon jump hack. And honestly, it's fun when you first get it, but it kind of breaks the game so hard to a degree that it becomes a little boring to me. I mean, breaking levels and puzzling out those really weird collectibles is fun. Heck, I just argued that it's kind of a core mechanic of the game, but I feel like I also gotta work for it a little bit, you know? The secret costume is cool, but absolutely make this the last thing you do in the game. That's all I gotta say. Tim Plush. So now that we've gotten to meet Tim a little, let's tell a story about how he is responsible for probably the most hoops I've ever had to go through to get a single plush. I like collecting plushes, some of my favorite being semi-uncommon plushes from sources not everyone might recognize, and I might never find an opportunity to purchase again. Heck, I even have a bit of a wish list of sorts of ones I would love to find someday. I started this collection, I believe, around 2019. I probably have more than the average person here, but I like to think I'm not particularly unhealthy with my obsession. Judge of that what you will. I'm smart to look for bargains when I see them, never get too many at once. I like to keep my collection limited to these two shelves, and if I do get too many, I would not be above selling a couple to tailor my collection more to my niche, you know? Anyway, when I saw that this was a thing, I was adamant to add it to my collection. Surprisingly, they're still purchasable from the Square Enix website. It's a little pricey for a plush, I will admit, but it looked pretty high quality for what it was, so I thought it looked kind of worth it. Heck, I thought it'd be silly to use in B-roll for this video too. I was really excited, but then I realized that they only ship to certain countries. My country, the United States, not being available. I don't know why they couldn't have shipped anywhere. I'd gladly pay the extra shipping for something like this. I don't know the logistics behind this stuff. My best guess is they only have a certain amount available for every country, and they have no plans to restock these, given how poorly the game sold and also its reception. So, what's up here is what's left, I guess. So I did the next best thing I could think of. I reached out to internet friends I knew who were from the listed countries. Ultimately, thank you to Evisaurus. I paid her to purchase the plush and then paid her again to ship it to America for what amounted to the most I've ever paid for a single plush. It was like $70 by the end. Like, if I didn't have plans for it, I wouldn't have even bothered, I think. I'm gonna get my money's worth out of this thing. Hell, expect to see him in future videos from now on, even. Using plushes in bumpers and B-roll is surprisingly fun, actually. I'm shocked I've never done this until now. I even brought it to a furry convention. I would ask people in suits if they'd like to take a picture with it, and got some really funny images as a result. Surprisingly, no one recognized what a Tim was, but they all knew of the game when I told them what it was, let me tell you. I'm not going to share the pictures of people holding Tim in their suits here, because while they did consent to the picture, they have no knowledge that I would use it in a video essay. But yeah, thanks for your help with this, Evie. Go follow her Twitter. This definitely felt like a worthwhile purchase to me. You know what I found kind of refreshing about the game? The fact that no one talks ever. Your protagonist has their little jumping grunt, and there are some occasional Balinese clips here and there, but there's never a word of spoken, understandable dialogue, I'd say. I don't know why, but I feel like there's been a bit of an insurgence in games recently of every stride needing to have a full story beat or some kind of joke during any kind of downtime. It might just be a me thing. I started noticing this particularly starting around the PS4 era. The gist is, I tend not to like this trend because I find random interjections either annoying, immersion breaking, or boring.
No, he's going through his trauma.
No, I want to get half the time I'm thinking, this should have just been a cutscene. And the other half, I'm feeling like the line wasn't nearly as clever as the writer probably thought it was. Long story short, Balan doesn't do this. Like, you're not going to pass by Balan stuck in a trash can and hear the kid make a snarky joke about that. Instead, I get to do that.
Oh!
Who put him in the trash?
Why are you in the garbage? That's how I feel after I do all the Balan Bouts.
Again, might be a me thing, I don't know. You know how at the end of every video essay of a game like this, the person goes, "It's a good start," or "I'd love to see a sequel to this." Imagine if they just patched all these small issues. I'm not going to do that here. Like, let's be real here, this game is never going to get a sequel or a follow-up. It sold poorly, it reviewed poorly, the head director has a credible record. It's just never going to happen, and I think it'd be healthy to just accept that Balan is going to forever go down as, at best, somewhat of a cult hit. Though, you know what I would love to see? You guys know what randomizers are? They're basically mods that shuffle around all the rewards, treasures, and enemies of a game. They have a habit of forcing players into getting items and doing areas completely out of order, essentially turning the game into a giant puzzle box. Seriously, if there's a game you love and would love to find a new way to breathe life into it, look into if it has a randomizer. You'd be surprised with their support for. And I don't know if there's any modding scene for this game whatsoever, but I genuinely think a Balan randomizer would be a ton of fun. Imagine all of the statues and costumes, maybe even the ability to access individual stages being shuffled around for an experience that asks you to consider what you have and what you could do with it at every turn. Imagine if it had archipelago support even, like doing all that work for the secret costume and having it be a small star for someone playing Kirby Dream Land 3, or someone beating a super boss and activating a box fox trap. I don't know, man. I guess consider this a call to action if anyone's up for it. Heck, this new way to play could even be fun for folks who didn't really like the base game. And lastly, the final topic I want to mention in this video, Jumping Jack is adorable. This is the best design in the game, I don't care what anyone says. The body shape, the patterns, the colors, the fluffs, the bracelets, the paws, his little Rube replica, that drawn-on mouth expression I'm an absolute sucker for. He's so cute. Maybe I'm a little biased because I too am a light blue kangaroo, but god, I just want to give him a big hug. God, I've been working on this video for nearly 4 months. Y'all can endure me obsessing over a character practically made for me in like a minute. And that's my video. Balan Wonderworld is not a bad game. It's a game of a lot of flaws, but also endless passion and talent behind it. What it does well, it does extremely well, and I hope this video might inspire some people to appreciate a little bit more. Thank you as always to my Patreon supporters, Basil Havoc, Firestriker, Royal Blot, Sean, and Great Wolf. Your help is always appreciated. And I will leave the link to all my stuff in the description below if you would like to support the video and my channel in any way. Give the like a video and share it around. Like, I promised myself I only really beg for likes on the big video essays, and yeah, I'd really appreciate it. It would help it out. Also, before we actually go, I do have a little bit of an idea in mind. I want to try something moving forward. Basically, I want to try making a bunch of smaller video essays over the next coming months, just to see like how that'll work out. So like instead of spending several months on one massive video, instead I'll spend like a month and a half on a bunch of like smaller videos, mainly indie games that I would love to talk about but I don't really think would make for a good playthrough. That could be kind of interesting, right? I don't know, I guess we'll see where that goes, but yeah, for the time being, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you folks later. Thanks for watching.